we talk about Amin Zahabi versus Jose Aldo? I thought Jose
All
Aldo
right.
won that fight. I kind of feel like he just wants to go back to doing the fun boxing fights, and there
Right.
needs to be some sort of discussion as to like how the last chapter in his UFC career was handled. These three fights were just bizarre. The scoring in the last fight was weird. The scoring
Yeah.
in this fight was weird. There were no stakes attached to any of these fights. He wasn't. It's one thing to fight like up and comers, you know, guys who you can clearly tell that they've got a lot of stock in. That he wasn't even fighting those guys.
Alright, so Jose Aldo just lost a decision to Amin Zahabi last night, then immediately retired in the octagon afterwards, but can we just talk about how utterly disrespectful and disgraceful the UFC was to Jose during his final fights with the company? Seriously, Jose Aldo, one of the greatest fighters in the history of the sport and the longest reigning featherweight champion ever, spent the final portion of his UFC career getting matched up against some of the most random, meaningless opponents imaginable. And look, I'm not saying that his last three opponents were bad fighters by any means, but let's just keep it real. The way that the UFC handled Aldo's final fights is borderline criminal. And I'm not saying that they should have given him title shots or number one contender fights, but instead of giving him fights against other legends or just even big names, they intentionally underutilized him so that they could prop him up against opponents that nobody cares about. And yeah, in this video, I'm going to be talking about all this and more. But first, as always, let's talk about the fight. Right off the bat, I think it's really unfortunate that Aldo missed weight by a country mile and ended up stepping on the scale at 143 pounds. Obviously, this is a really bad look for him, and it's very unfair to Zahabi, who actually did cut the necessary weight in order to make 135. Regardless, Amin still felt confident enough to win despite the circumstances, and it looks like he was right in feeling that way because he walked away with the unanimous decision win. But the thing is, I don't know if I agree with the judges on this one. I've watched this fight 3 times now just to make absolutely sure I'm not letting any bias sway my opinion, and each time I've scored the fight 29-28 for Aldo. First round was clearly Jose's, where he looked really good, but honestly, I think that he overexerted himself too early considering how much he started to slow down starting in the second. And even in spite of the fact that he was visibly tired, I still scored round 2 for him even though it was a close round. I will say though that if you scored this round for Zahabi, I can't understand why, seeing as he definitely ended the round much stronger than Aldo did. That being said, round 3 was definitely Zahabi's. Even though he almost got his head kicked off his shoulder several times when Aldo had him hurt, he was able to take advantage of Jose gassing out and beat him up from top position for the last 2.5 minutes of the fight. Look man, I don't think that the fight was a robbery by any means like a lot of people are saying. Like, I myself don't agree with the judges' scorecards on this one, but seeing as that second round was pretty close, I can't be all that mad at them for giving the fight to Amin. What I am mad about is the fact that this is the 3rd fight in a row where I felt completely dumbfounded by the UFC's choice of opponent for Aldo. This guy is unquestionably one of the true legends of the sport, and even after all the miles that he's put into his career, he's still more than competitive with the younger fighters of today. This guy dominated the UFC for years and defended his title 9 times if we're including his WEC career, which we absolutely should. You would think that a fighter with Aldo's resume would be given high-profile fights against other legends or just simply recognizable names, but nope. Instead, Aldo got handed a series of meaningless matchups that did nothing for his legacy or for the fans, and frankly, I think it's downright disrespectful how the UFC handled his last 3 fights. Let's rewind back to the Jonathan Martinez fight. This was Aldo's first fight back in the UFC after his first retirement, so I guess I can kind of understand why Dana gave him someone like J-Mart. To be fair, Martinez was on a really good win streak, and there were a lot of people saying that he was on his way to being a contender at 135. I didn't hate this fight back then, and I still don't hate it now looking back at it, but I still think that it was a weird decision to match them up with each other. I guess it was a good test for Aldo to see if he could still hang in the division, but even still, they could have given him a guy with a more established name who would have tested him all the same. But this is where things really start to get bad. After Aldo cruises through Martinez where he proves that he can still hang, the UFC then gives him Mario Bautista. This is indefensible, and obviously this fight is controversial for multiple reasons, but at a fundamental level, giving Aldo a no-name fighter like Bautista is a massive slap in the face. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that Mario didn't deserve to fight Jose because he's a bad fighter. Mario didn't deserve to fight Jose because nobody in the world wanted to see him fight Jose. Of course, up-and-coming fighters fighting the veterans is a natural part of the sport, but considering the massive gap in relevance between them, this matchup was downright stupid. And usually I would say that seeing as this fight ended up being hated by fans because of Mario's game plan, Dana probably feels dumb for setting it up. But honestly, considering that he greenlit this fight in the first place, I get the feeling that he wanted to see Aldo lose by any means necessary, thus he doesn't have any regrets. Personally, I thought that Jose won this fight seeing as Mario just walled installed the entire time, but how the fight itself played out is besides the point. Giving Jose a relative no-name like Mario this late into his career is wasteful, and it goes against Dana's insistence that the UFC gives fans the fights they want to see. No one wanted to see this fight. And then of course we have the Zahabi fight. I do think that Zahabi is going to have a pretty good UFC career moving forward, and he has been making a name for himself recently, but even still, there were so many better opponents that they could have given Aldo. Look, there's only so many ways that I can say that the UFC did Aldo dirty with his final 3 opponents, opponents, but they did this man dirty. Jose still has the name and the skills to create big fights against other big names, and instead they paired him up with guys that only super hardcore fans would know. Just think about it, since coming back in 2024, you could have done Aldo versus Dominic Cruz, Henry Cejudo, Corey Sandhagen, Umar Nurmagomedov, Song Yadong, and the list goes on. And maybe he loses to most or all of the guys that I just mentioned, but I would have much rather have seen him lose to Corey Sandhagen than win against Jonathan Martinez. And even if Aldo and Bautista had a fight of the night level banger, I still would have much rather have seen Aldo fight Dominic Cruz, which is a fight that we've been begging for like a decade now. The UFC's lack of creativity in managing Aldo's final fights is honestly fucking baffling, and in my opinion, it does seem like they purposely screwed him over. They've had so many opportunities to book meaningful legacy fights for him, either against other legends or just big names in general, but instead they gave him pointless filler fights that nobody wanted. Now, I don't consider myself all that much of a conspiracy theorist, but I really do believe that the UFC wanted to punish Aldo for leaving the UFC to go and do boxing. After he lost to Merab and retired for the first time, Jose went and did 2 boxing fights in 2023 before re-signing with the UFC. Personally, I do think it's plausible that Dana gave him these low-profile opponents as a form of punishment or retaliation for stepping outside of his control and trying something new. Everyone in the world knows how petty and spiteful Dana is, and given his history of holding grudges, I really don't think it's all that crazy to think that although he was happy to have Jose back in the UFC, he also wanted to limit his star power for if and when he ever decides to compete outside of the UFC again. Aldo's move to boxing could have rubbed Dana the wrong way, thus he wanted to make Aldo's return to the UFC as unrewarding as possible. Because before Aldo left the UFC the first time, he was definitely given fights that at least made sense. Merab, Rob Font, Pedro Munoz, Chito Vera, like those are all recognizable names. And seeing as he went from fighting all of those guys to fighting Jonathan Martinez, Mario Bautista, and Ayman Zahabi, it just feels like way too much of a drop-off in terms of name value to be purely coincidental, and I do not think it was a coincidence. Dana got butthurt that Jose worked his UFC legacy into doing some boxing fights, and the opponents that he was given when he returned was his punishment for stepping out of line. At the end of the day, the UFC feeding legends to younger fighters to build their names isn't wrong, but there should be balance. Respecting history matters. Fighters who literally helped build the UFC into what it is today deserve more than the send-off that they gave Aldo. Jose's final fight should have been filled with meaningful matchups and nostalgic fights. This guy deserved a hero send-off, and even if they fed him to the top of the division and he lost every fight, at least there would have been emotional stakes. But instead what we got was an insulting farewell tour that nobody really cared about. The good thing is, for people that actually know ball, Aldo will always be remembered as one of the best fighters of all time. His legacy is secure regardless of how badly the UFC botched his final 3 fights. But let's not forget or forgive just how shamefully Dana White and the UFC treated one of their most legendary champions. Jose Aldo deserved better, the fans deserved better, and the sport deserved better. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know your thoughts about Jose's retirement. Did the UFC do him dirty, or do you somehow find his last 3 opponents justifiable? As always, if you like the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.